She meant everything to us. She meant everything to me. Didn't know how much she meant to me until this day.
A father living a nightmare after receiving a call his daughter, 21-year-old Autumn Shanks, was shot and killed in her apartment early Friday morning. Ridgeland police say they received a call just before 2 a.m. about someone being shot in the head at the Pinebrook apartment complex. When officers arrived on scene, they were met by Danquarius Biased. After searching the apartment, police found 21-year-old Shanks dead in the bedroom. Police say she had been shot. Orlando Shanks says his daughter was in a toxic relationship with Biased, but had no idea things were this bad until it was too late.
I saw my daughter last. We had a talk Tuesday. That was my last time with her. And if I had any notion that this was going on, I would have snatched her away. I would not have allowed her to go back into that situation.
4 a.m., Orlando Shanks' phone rang. At first, it didn't feel like danger. It felt like trouble. The kind of call that makes you sit up, confused, your heart already starting to race before you even know why. When he answered, the voice on the other end didn't explain much. Just one instruction: sit down. And then the words came. His daughter, Autumn Shanks, was dead. For a moment, nothing made sense. The room didn't move. The world didn't move. It was just silence. The kind of silence that follows something so final, your mind refuses to process it. Shock. Disbelief. A father trying to understand how a conversation he had just days earlier could now be the last one he would ever have. He had seen her that Tuesday. Spoken to her. There was no goodbye, no warning that this was where it was all heading. Autumn was only 21 years old, and the person at the center of it all was someone who, on the surface, never should have been a threat. Danquarius Biased. A young man people knew. A football player. A preacher's son. Raised in a family that, from the outside, represented structure, faith, and discipline. To many, it looked like the kind of relationship that should have been safe. But behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. When Orlando to intervene in his daughter's relationship, Danquarius knocked him out. Yet somehow, she remained in the relationship. And now, Autumn was gone. Months would pass. Then nearly a year. And in February 2026, Orlando would sit with that same pain, writing words no parent should ever have to write, trying to make sense of a reality that still hadn't changed. Because nearly a year later, the man responsible for his daughter's death was still out there. For nearly a year, the man who killed her had been walking free. If you're into real true crime stories, stories that dig deep into the facts and the people behind them, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We post new videos every single day, so there's always another case to uncover, another truth to explore. Autumn Shanks was the kind of person people naturally gravitated toward. She was born into a close-knit family, the kind where time together mattered. It wasn't unusual for them to be out traveling, laughing, finding small moments to enjoy each other's company. At the center of that world was her father, Orlando Shanks, a man who, by all accounts, had a strong and active presence in her life. Their bond wasn't distant or strained. It was real, consistent, and present. From an early age, Autumn stood out. She had energy that filled a room, confidence that didn't need to be announced. She was bold, expressive, and social. The kind of person who could move between different circles and still feel like she belonged in all of them. People noticed her, and more importantly, they remembered her. There was also a contrast to her that made her even more distinctive. On one side, she embraced everything feminine. She loved makeup, getting dressed up, presenting herself with style and confidence. She enjoyed looking good, taking pride in how she carried herself. But at the same time, that softness existed alongside something else entirely. Autumn loved speed, cars, motorcycles, the adrenaline of movement.
What happened? We got Autumn on the set. We're going to have her in her nice Ducati motorcycle ensemble. She has the Ducati course, red, black, and white. This motorcycle is fully equipped with the armor, shoulder pads, elbow pads, knee pads. She is ready for what? Track day. Let's see. Panigale 1199 sport bike. We're going to get our track days on with this one. And she will be the new lady interim race rider for Team Shanks. That's right.
Yep.
The kind of interest that didn't always match the image people had when they first saw her. It wasn't one or the other, it was both. She could be dressed up and polished, and still be the same person who enjoyed engines, motion, and the thrill of it all. That balance made her memorable. Within her community, she was well known, outgoing, approachable. The type of person who didn't struggle to connect with others. Her personality carried her, and people responded to it. She wasn't hidden in the background. She lived her life in a way that made her visible. And as she moved through her teenage years, that visibility naturally brought attention. It was during that time, high school, that she met Dan Quarius biased. At first glance, nothing about the pairing raised concern. In fact, it looked like the opposite. He was a football player, known, recognized. He came from a family that, on the surface, carried respect in the community. His parents were involved in ministry. They had built a reputation around faith, structure, and leadership. From the outside, it appeared stable, grounded, the kind of background people often associate with discipline and good values. For someone like Autumn, social, confident, surrounded by attention, it wasn't unusual that their paths would cross. And when they did, there was an immediate connection built on familiarity. School, social circles, visibility. They were both known, both present in the same environment. At the beginning, it made sense. There was attraction, attention. A relationship that didn't seem out of place. But what appeared normal on the surface began shifting underneath. The change wasn't immediate. It didn't happen in a way that would have made people step in right away. Instead, it developed gradually, subtle at first, then more noticeable. Control started to replace connection. The tone of the relationship shifted. What may have once been playful or light became more rigid, more demanding. Words changed. The way he spoke to her changed. Belittling comments, emotional pressure. The kind of behavior that doesn't always leave visible marks, but still does damage. There were early warning signs, instability in his behavior, a lack of consistency. Even things that might seem small at first, like falling behind, like graduating later than expected, began to reflect a larger pattern. A shift away from the image people had assumed he represented. And as that shift happened, the relationship followed it. Behind closed doors, it became something entirely different. What had once looked like a normal teenage relationship began turning into something controlling, isolating, and eventually violent. The dynamic changed in a way that placed Autumn in a position where she wasn't just in a relationship. She was navigating it carefully. There were threats, not just toward her, but toward the people around her. Toward her family. And those threats carried weight, enough weight to change how she interacted with the people closest to her. Over time, the changes became visible. She wasn't as open, not as expressive about what was going on in her life. The same person who had once been so outgoing began pulling inward. Conversations became more guarded. Details became limited. As if that wasn't enough, he became physical with her. There were a lot of domestic incidents between them. Orlando noticed. A father doesn't always need everything explained to recognize when something isn't right. The shift in her behavior, the tension that seemed to follow her, the way she carried herself differently, it all pointed to something beneath the surface. And eventually, that tension led to confrontation after one of those physical incidents. At one point, Orlando came face to face with Dan Quarius. He threatened to call the cops on him if he ever touched his daughter again. What started as a conversation didn't stay that way for long. In the middle of that confrontation, Autumn was there, trying to intervene, trying to stop it from going further. But it didn't stop. At some point during that exchange, Orlando was struck, hit with enough force to knock him unconscious. And even after he went down, the violence didn't end there. It continued. Dan Quarius kept on kicking him even as he was unconscious. When he came to, the situation had already crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. It was no longer a question of whether something was wrong. It was clear. From that moment forward, the situation wasn't something to monitor. It was something to fight against. And Orlando did. He didn't stay silent, he didn't step back. He took action in the ways available to him. Reports were filed, authorities were contacted, attempts were made to create some form of protection, some kind of intervention that could separate his daughter from the situation she was in. But the response never matched the urgency. There was no lasting intervention, no decisive action that changed the trajectory of what was happening. The system acknowledged the reports, but it didn't stop the pattern. At the same time, the family continued trying in their own way. Conversations, pleas, attempts to get her to leave, to step away from a situation that was clearly becoming more dangerous. But leaving isn't always simple. There were layers holding her in place. Fear, not just of him, but of what he might do if she tried to fully separate. The threats he had made weren't empty in her mind. They carried real consequences. There was also emotional attachment, The kind that develops over time, especially in relationships that begin young. The familiarity, the history, the connection that doesn't disappear just because things become difficult. I know most people watching this will judge her for staying, but anybody that has been involved in such a relationship will understand that these things don't work like a switch you can just turn off. And then there was control, the kind that builds gradually, that isolates, that limits what someone feels they can say, who they can talk to, how much they can reveal. Over time, it reshapes how a person navigates their own life. All of that combined created a situation where, even after everything that had happened, even after violence had been seen firsthand, she remained in it. And the situation didn't improve. It continued to the point she started ignoring her own family and cut off all communication with them. For years, it continued, until eventually something began to shift again. By late 2024, there were signs that Autumn was trying to change the direction of her life. She reconnected more closely with her father. Communication became more consistent. There was movement, small at first but meaningful. She was trying to leave, trying to step away from something that had defined years of her life. But as that shift began, the pressure around her increased. The relationship was deteriorating. The tension was rising. The balance that had existed, however unstable, was breaking apart. And alongside that personal shift, something else was approaching. A court date. There were legal proceedings ahead, testimony scheduled. Both Autumn and her father were expected to be involved. The situation was the physical abuse he had given to her father years back. Finally, the case was heading to trial. And with that came a different kind of pressure. For someone already controlling, already unstable, the idea of losing control, of being exposed, of facing legal consequences, can shift everything. By early 2025, all of these elements were colliding at the same time. A relationship falling apart, the young woman trying to leave, a father who had been fighting for years to protect his daughter, and a situation that had already shown it was capable of violence. Everything was building towards something. In the early morning hours of February 7th, everything that had been building for years reached its breaking point. Inside the apartment, there were no cameras. No full account of the final moments. Whatever was said between them, whatever triggered the escalation, remains known only to the two people who were there. What is known is how it ended. At some point, the situation escalated beyond control. Danquarius picked up a gun, and in that confined space, in a place that should have been safe, a single decision was made that could never be undone. Autumn Shanks was shot. Point blank, a shot to the head. And just like that, the life of a 21-year-old woman, someone full of energy, personality, and promise, was taken in an instant. After the gunshot, there was silence. The kind of silence that follows something irreversible. Around 1:50 a.m., police were dispatched to the apartment after reports of a shooting. When officers arrived, they didn't find a scene of chaos or a suspect fleeing. They found him still there. Danquarius Biest remained at the apartment. He hadn't run. He hadn't disappeared into the night. He was present when law enforcement arrived, as if what had just happened hadn't required escape. Inside, Autumn was found in the bedroom. There was nothing that could be done. Hours later, around 4 a.m., Orlando Shanks received the call that would change his life forever.
I thought I was in trouble. I didn't know what the call was about at 4 o'clock in the morning. So he told me to sit down, and I sat, and he went on to tell me that my daughter was dead. And I was stunned. I was shocked. I was hurt. I'm still hurting.
He and his son made their way to the scene. By the time they arrived, it was already over. The apartment had become something else entirely. No longer a place of living, but a place marked by loss. And then came the moment no parent should ever experience. Watching his daughter being carried out on a stretcher. In the immediate aftermath, Danquarius Biest was arrested and charged with murder.
According to Ridgeland Police, Autumn Shanks was found dead at the Pinebrook Apartments on Knoll Drive just before 2 a.m. on February 8th. Officials say 23-year-old Danquarius Biest was on the scene when officers got there, and he is charged with murder. Biest being held with no bond in the Madison County Detention Center.
In the days after her death, grief settled in. Family, friends, and members of the community gathered to say goodbye to Autumn Shanks. On February 19th, less than 2 weeks after she was killed, they came together for her funeral. The room was filled with emotion, tears, silence, and disbelief. People who had grown up with her, laughed with her, and shared everyday moments now stood together, trying to process a reality that still didn't feel real. They remembered who she was before everything changed.
Of the 21-year-old who was shot and killed at Pinebrook Apartments in Ridgeland honored her life today. A balloon release held today at Terry High School, where family, friends, and classmates of Shanks gathered to honor her memory. They shared what they loved most about her, and then they released pink and blue balloons.
energy she carried. The confidence, the way she stood out without trying. The girl who loved cars and motorcycles just as much as she loved getting dressed up. The version of Autumn that existed before the fear, before the control, before everything that led to that moment. For her family, it was something deeper. A final goodbye no parent is ever prepared for. And even as the service ended, the reality remained. This wasn't something that would fade. Because what was taken from them wasn't just a life, it was a future. And no matter what happened next, that loss would remain. But what followed didn't bring the kind of closure the family expected. Despite the severity of the crime, he was released on bail, and for months, that reality became something the family had to live with. The man accused of killing Autumn wasn't hidden away. He wasn't removed from society. He was out, moving freely, living his life. For over a year, that remained the situation. And for her family, that meant something deeper than frustration. It meant fear. It meant anger. It meant waking up every day knowing that the person responsible for her death was still out in the world as if nothing had happened. By February 2026, 1 year after her death, that pain had not lessened. It had only settled into something constant. That's when Orlando put his feelings into words, sharing a message on Facebook as he tried to process what that year had been. He wrote, "God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." 12 months later, to date, my daughter was murdered at the hands of her childhood friend, a man who shot and killed her point blank, up close and personal, without regard for her family, or humanity. He shot her in the head. He murdered her. He had no respect for Autumn. He could have just walked away. My daughter Autumn was taken senselessly, and to this date, 1 year later, 2/7/2026, he still walks, lurks, and roams the streets as if he has done no wrong. One will never understand the impact of a system of government, lawyers, and a family that blatantly ignores the murderer's actions as if he deserves to be treated equally. No, he does not. He needs to be put away immediately. That was no accident, not by any measure. It was cold, it was calculated, and I believe it had been planned for years. Justice needs to be served. My baby didn't deserve this. R.I.P. baby. Daddy and all the family love you and miss you. Those weren't just words of grief. They were words shaped by time, by months of waiting, by a system that hadn't yet delivered the outcome the family believed should have come immediately. But as February turned into March 2026, something changed. The case moved forward. The uncertainty that had defined the previous year began to narrow into something more concrete. In March 2026, Orlando shared another update. He wrote, "Well, for all that it's worth, the idiot that killed our precious Autumn decided not to take a trial for his inhumane actions, and finally decided to plead guilty to murdering my daughter, Autumn Shanks. In court today, at Madison County Circuit Court, he pleaded guilty and was taken into custody. Sentencing will be given on March 23rd at 9 a.m. in the same court, where preferably he will receive the 40-year sentence term that he rightfully deserves for taking a life. A precious life that had so much to offer. R.I.P. baby. I'm so sorry life ended for you, leaving us all stricken with grief. Forever you are missed. Forever 21."
The murder suspect in Ridgeland pleads guilty days before he was set to go to trial. Donquarius Bias pled guilty today to second-degree murder. He admitted to killing Autumn Shanks at the Pine Brook apartment complex in Ridgeland. That deadly shooting happened February 2025. Now, his trial was supposed to begin Monday. Bias will be sentenced Monday, March 23rd in Madison County Circuit Court.
For the first time since her death, there was a shift. The man who had been free for nearly a year was now in custody. But even then, the emotions surrounding that moment weren't simple. Relief didn't mean peace. Justice didn't erase what had happened. Later that same month, Orlando shared one more message. Not as an announcement, but as a reflection. He wrote, "Remembering Autumn. Sitting here with Autumn's mom and some family, I don't see it as a victory that the person responsible conceded to murdering our daughter. We are simply in a place of relief, accepting the fact that we no longer have to live in agony, knowing that murderer was roaming the city streets in his own sense of victory for what he had done. He is now in jail after being free for 10.5 months following his crime against our daughter. We can now begin to accept a different level of peace in knowing this individual is no longer in our society. As we move forward day by day, please keep us in your prayers as the pain from our loss is ongoing. It is sad and heartbreaking, but we are pushing forward daily, all of us, her brothers, family, and friends. R.I.P. our precious Autumn." It wasn't celebration. It wasn't closure. It was something quieter than that. Relief. The kind that comes not from victory, but from the absence of fear. And even with that, the reality remained unchanged. Autumn Shanks was gone. A young woman who had once filled rooms with her energy. Someone who balanced strength and softness, confidence and warmth. Someone who had a future that extended far beyond the walls of that apartment. What happened to her wasn't just a moment. It was the result of a pattern. A relationship that had shown signs of danger long before it reached its final point. A situation where leaving became the most dangerous step she could take. Her story now exists as both a memory and a warning. Because what happened to Autumn didn't begin on February 7th. And for families watching from the outside, trying to understand when to step in, when to act, when to recognize the signs, it leaves behind a question